The shoe hit the floor before anyone had time to react. It landed right at her feet. A black Oxford, Italian leather, the kind of shoe that costs more than 3 months of her rent. It skidded across the polished marble floor of the hotel lobby and stopped just inches from the tip of her worn sneaker. Maya didn't move. She was still holding the tray. The coffee cups rattled softly against each other, the only sound in a lobby that had, all at once, gone very quiet. "Taos?" The voice came from above her. Not above in any physical sense, the man was standing on the same floor, in the same room, but there was a quality to how he spoke that made everything feel lower by comparison. "Yes, you. The help." She looked up slowly. She'd learned not to look up fast. Fast movements drew attention, and attention in places like this. The Grand Vantage Hotel, 42 floors of glass and ambition in the middle of downtown, was rarely the kind you wanted. He was maybe 50, silver at the temples, jaw like something chiseled out of certainty. His suit probably had a name, not a brand name, the actual name of the man who sewed it. He was flanked by 2 other men in identical postures, the kind of men who existed to agree with whatever he said next. "My shoe fell," he announced. Maya looked at the shoe. She looked at him. She looked at the 4 other hotel guests drifting past who had slowed, almost imperceptibly, to watch. "I see that," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not yet. More like surprise that she'd responded with words instead of movement. "Pick it up," he said. The tray was still in her hands. 3 coffees, 1 tea, a small plate of biscuits for the guests in Suite 14. She had 4 minutes before the order would be marked late in the system, which would trigger a note in her file. The 3rd this month, and she was already on notice. She set the tray down on the nearest surface, a console table near the elevator bank, and walked the 3 steps to the shoe. She picked it up. She held it out to him. He didn't take it. "Now clean it first," he said. A corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. There's a scuff on the toe. One of his companions made a sound, half laugh, half cough, and looked away. The lobby was not empty. It was never empty at 8:40 in the morning. There were guests checking out, a family with luggage stacked near the door, a concierge pretending to type something, a young woman with a phone pointed slightly too casually in their direction. Maya looked at the shoe in her hand. She looked at the man's face. She looked at the scuff on the toe, which was real. A thin white mark across the black leather, like a small scar. "I don't have a cloth," she said. "No?" He tilted his head, amused now, committed to the performance. "Well, use your shirt then. Or—" He paused, and the pause was the cruelest part, stretched out until the people around them had no choice but to hear what came next. "If you get down on your knees and clean it properly, I'll give you something for your trouble." Silence. Not the ordinary silence of a lobby between sounds, but the held breath kind. "How much trouble?" she asked. He blinked. She had surprised him again. $1 million, he said, and laughed, the kind of laugh meant to signal to everyone watching that this was a joke, that she was a joke, that the whole situation was entertainment. His companions laughed too, a beat behind like an echo that had rehearsed. "Clean my shoes on your knees in front of all these people, and I'll write you a check for $1 million. How's that?" Maya stood completely still. The shoe was still in her hand. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that his smile started to do something uncomfortable at the edges, and then she looked at the room, the family near the door, the concierge, the woman with the phone, the 2 men who existed to agree. "You should be careful," she said quietly, "about what you offer in public." She set the shoe down on the floor in front of him, handle side up like a gift, and picked up her tray. She walked away. Behind her, she heard one of his companions say something under his breath, and she heard the man, whose name she didn't know yet, though she would, soon enough, laugh again, louder this time, as if volume could close the strange, small door she'd just opened. It couldn't. 3 hours later, her shift manager called her into the back office and told her she was being let go. "Budget cuts," he said. Not meeting her eyes. Restructuring. She nodded. She didn't cry. She'd been waiting for something like this, ever since the night 6 weeks ago when she'd returned a wallet to a guest, full with all the cash still in it, and the guest had thanked her by asking if she was sure she hadn't taken anything first. She cleared out her locker, a change of socks, a granola bar. A photograph of her daughter that she kept taped to the inside of the door because she liked seeing it when she arrived at the beginning of a shift. Lily's face, 7 years old and already asking hard questions. She put the photograph in her jacket pocket, close to her chest. Outside, the morning had turned cold. The kind of cold that isn't about temperature. The sky was pale and still, the city moving around her in its efficient, indifferent way. She sat down on the steps of the parking structure across the street from the hotel and looked at the building she'd just left. 42 floors of glass. She thought about the shoe, about the way he'd laughed, about the woman with the phone. She pulled out her own phone, cracked screen, 2 years old, and searched the name she'd seen on the hotel reservation system that morning when she'd been pulling the Suite 14 order. She'd noticed it then. She noticed most things. Richard Hale, CEO, Hale Capital Group. Net worth estimated at $4.3 billion. She stared at the number for a moment. Then she looked at the photograph of Lily. She didn't know what was going to happen next. She didn't have a plan. Not yet. Not fully. But something had shifted inside her in that lobby. Something that had been bent for a long time and had finally, quietly, straightened. She stood up, pulled her jacket tighter. Whatever was coming, she was done looking at the floor. Maya Calloway had learned early that the world was divided into two kinds of tired. There was the tired that came from working hard, the honest kind, the kind that sat in your shoulders and your feet and faded after a decent night of sleep. And then there was the other kind, the tired that lived somewhere deeper, behind the eyes, in the chest, in the part of you that was supposed to bounce back but had started, slowly, to forget how. She'd been carrying both for 3 years. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on Crestfield Avenue that had been nice once, in the 70s, and had been coasting on that memory ever since. The elevator hadn't worked since February. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking, usually something with onions, which wasn't unpleasant exactly, just constant. Maya had stopped noticing it around month 2. Now it felt like home in the way that all imperfect things eventually do, not because they become beautiful, but because your body stops fighting them. She had 2 rooms and a bathroom and a kitchen that was technically part of the living room, if you were being generous with definitions. The walls were off-white, which was just a polite name for the color of things that used to be white. There were drawings taped above the radiator, Lily's work, mostly animals. Mostly unidentifiable but rendered with enormous confidence. A purple giraffe, a dog that might have been a horse, a fish the size of a building, which Lily had titled The Boss in careful, enormous letters. The boss presided over everything. Maya's mother, Ruth Ann, was sitting at the small kitchen table when Maya came in, still in her coat. Ruth was 71 and moved through the world with the deliberate, unhurried quality of someone who had made her peace with most of it. She was doing a crossword puzzle with the focused attention of a woman defusing a bomb. She looked up when the door opened, looked at Maya's face, put down her pen. What happened? I'll tell you in a minute. Maya set her bag down, went to the refrigerator, stood in front of it for a moment without taking anything out. The refrigerator hummed. There was leftover rice, half a pepper, 2 eggs, a container of yogurt that was technically still good. She closed the door. They let you go, Ruth said. It wasn't a question. Budget cuts. Maya finally took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. That's what they said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. She picked up her pen again, looked at the crossword, put it back down. Was it because of this morning? The man in the lobby? Maya turned around. How do you know about that? Lily's school pickup isn't until 3. I had time. Ruth slid her phone across the table, screen up. The video had 40,000 views in 6 hours. Someone had filmed it, the woman with the phone, the one Maya had noticed, and posted it with the caption, "Billionaire humiliates hotel worker. Her response is everything." The angle was slightly off, and the audio was imperfect, but you could hear it clearly enough. The offer, the silence. And then Maya's voice, steady and quiet. You should be careful about what you offer in public. Maya watched it once without speaking. It's going to get bigger, Ruth said. I know. People are going to want to know who you are. I know that too. Ruth folded her hands on the table. She had the hands of someone who had worked with them her whole life. Strong, a little rough. The kind of hands that could fix things and bake things and hold a child through a fever and still show up the next morning. Maya had always found her mother's hands more comforting than almost anything else in the world. "What are you going to do?" Ruth asked. Maya sat down across from her. "I don't know yet. Find another job. Pay February's rent before they add the late fee. Pick up Lily." She paused. "In that order?" "Probably." Ruth nodded slowly. She didn't say it'll be fine or something will come up or any of the other things people said when they wanted to be kind, but didn't know what else to offer. That was one of the things Maya loved most about her mother. She had no interest in comfortable lies. "The man in the video," Ruth said instead, "Richard Hale. You looked him up." "I had time," Ruth said again, the same dry tone. She slid a small notepad across the table. She'd written things down in her careful, old-fashioned handwriting. A few lines, a name, a number. Maya looked at the notepad, then at her mother's face. "Mom, I'm just saying I had time." The school was 8 blocks away, and Maya walked them at the pace she always did, fast enough to stay warm, slow enough to think. The city moved around her the way it always did. Delivery trucks, a woman walking 3 dogs, 2 men arguing quietly outside a dry cleaner, a kid on a bike threading through traffic, with the immortal confidence of someone who had never been hurt yet. She thought about the job. She'd had it for 14 months, which was longer than the cafe job and shorter than the cleaning company where she'd worked nights for almost 2 years before they switched to a contract model and eliminated her position. She was good at the work. She was always good at the work. Thorough, quiet, reliable. She showed up early and stayed late, and never took things that weren't hers and always returned the wallets. It never seemed to matter as much as it should. She thought about Lily's tuition payment, which was due the 1st of next month. The school was public, but there were fees, supplies, the after-school program that meant Lily had somewhere safe to be on the days Ruth's knee was bad. $40 a month. It shouldn't be the thing that made her chest tighten, but it was because $40 existed in a very specific zone of almost manageable. She thought about Richard Hale. She thought about the way he'd laughed. Not the content of the laugh, the mechanics of it, the way his body had leaned back slightly, the way his companions had calibrated their own responses to match his, the way the whole room had reorganized itself around his amusement like iron filings around a magnet. She'd been in the service industry long enough to recognize power, to understand its grammar, but she'd rarely seen it deployed so casually, so cleanly, with so little friction. He hadn't expected friction. That was the thing. She wondered how often he got it. Lily came out of school in a yellow raincoat, which was unnecessary. It wasn't raining and hadn't been. But Lily had decided 2 weeks ago that the raincoat was her thing. And the decision had the immovable quality of all 7-year-old convictions. She saw Maya and ran. She always ran. Maya caught her, lifted her, held her for a moment longer than usual. "You smell like outside," Lily said approvingly. "I walked." "Did you see any dogs?" 3. On leashes. "What kind?" "I don't know dog breeds." "Baby." Lily pulled back and looked at her mother's face with the uncanny perceptiveness that small children had before the world taught them to be polite about what they noticed. "You look tired," she said. "I am a little." "The sad kind or the regular kind?" Maya looked at her daughter. The dark eyes, the 2 braids that Ruth had done that morning, the small, serious face waiting for an honest answer. "The in-between kind," Maya said. Lily nodded, considering this. Then she wriggled down, took Maya's hand and began walking. "Mr. Patterson said I could be the narrator in the spring play," she announced. "That's the person who tells everyone what's happening. I know what a narrator is. She said I have a good voice for it. Clear." Lily said the word with some pride, as if clarity were a rare gift. She said, "When I talk, people listen." Maya squeezed her hand. "When I talk, people listen." She thought about 40,000 views, about the video, about the way Richard Hale had looked at her when she'd walked away, the particular quality of surprise on a face that was not accustomed to it. That evening, after dinner, after Lily was bathed and read to, and finally, reluctantly, asleep. She had strong opinions about sleep and where it ranked in her personal hierarchy of desirable activities. Maya sat at the kitchen table with her mother's notepad and her cracked phone. The video had 112,000 views now. She read the comments for a while. Most of them were what you'd expect: outrage, admiration, people tagging other people. a few counter voices saying she should have just done her job, a handful of people asking who she was. One person who had somehow already identified the hotel, the date, and Richard Hale's name, the internet's private investigators, always tireless. She set the phone down and looked at her mother's handwriting on the notepad. Ruth had written one line, underlined twice. He said it in public, in front of witnesses, on camera. And below that, a name Maya didn't recognize, and a phone number. She stared at both for a long time, the apartment quiet around her, the city murmuring somewhere below the window. The boss fish watched from above the radiator, enormous and serene, presiding over everything. Maya picked up the pen, turned to a fresh page. She started to write. The name on the notepad was Patricia Wren. Maya had assumed it when she'd first seen it, that her mother had found a job listing, a contact, someone who needed a housekeeper or a hotel worker with 14 months of references and a clean record. Ruth had a network built from decades of church socials and neighborhood associations, and the particular kind of quiet loyalty that older women in working communities extended to each other, a web of names and numbers that had helped Maya more than once. But Patricia Wren was not a job listing. Maya found that out at 9:47 the next morning, sitting in a coffee shop 4 blocks from the apartment, when the woman herself walked through the door. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, compact and precise in the way of someone who made deliberate choices about everything. The grey blazer, the low heels, the single silver earring on each ear. She carried a leather portfolio that had been used enough to earn its creases. She scanned the room without appearing to scan it, found Maya in under 2 seconds, and walked directly over. Maya Calloway. Not a question. She sat down without being invited, which should have felt rude but somehow didn't. "I'm Patricia Wren. I'm an attorney." Maya wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "My mother didn't mention that part. Your mother is a smart woman. She mentioned that part to me." Patricia set the portfolio on the table but didn't open it. "I've been following the video since yesterday morning. I do a lot of work in employment law and public liability. When I saw it, I made some calls." She paused. "So then your mother called me. How do you know my mother?" "She cleaned my office for 3 years, about a decade ago." Something moved briefly across Patricia's face, not quite sentiment, but adjacent to it. She was reliable, honest. She once found a flash drive I'd been looking for 2 weeks and left it on my desk with a note. A small pause. "I've been meaning to do something useful with that debt for a while." Maya looked at her carefully. "So what kind of attorney?" "The kind Richard Hale doesn't like." Patricia finally opened the portfolio. "He has a history, Ms. Calloway. This wasn't the first time." She slid a page across the table. Maya looked at it without touching it. A printed document, dense with text, a case number at the top. 3 years ago, Patricia said, a catering worker named Dion Marshall was publicly humiliated by Hale at a corporate event. Hale knocked a tray out of his hands and told him, in front of 60 people, that he was, she glanced down at the page, the kind of man who would always be picking things up off the floor. Marshall sued for emotional distress and workplace harassment. The case was settled, confidentially. How confidentially? Confidentially enough that Hale felt comfortable doing it again. Patricia slid another page across. 18 months ago, a parking attendant. Similar pattern, public humiliation, witnesses. A comment designed to degrade. That one didn't go to court. The attendant needed the money quickly, and Hale's lawyers moved fast. She looked at Maya steadily. He has a system. Humiliate, settle, silence. He's done it at least 3 times that I can document. Maya was quiet for a moment. The coffee shop moved around them, the hiss of the espresso machine, 2 women at the next table discussing something with their hands, a child dropping a spoon on the tile floor and laughing at the sound. "What do you want from me?" Maya asked. "I want to know if you want to fight him." The words landed simply, without drama, which made them land harder. "On what grounds?" "Wrongful termination. To start. The hotel let you go within 3 hours of the incident. The timing is not subtle." Patricia tapped the portfolio. "Then there's the incident itself. What Hale did qualifies as public harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress under state law. And there's one more thing." She paused, and it was the kind of pause that meant what came next had weight. "He made a verbal offer on camera, in front of multiple witnesses, $1 million, in exchange for a specific act. Maya looked at her. In some jurisdictions, Patricia said carefully, a verbal offer made publicly, witnessed and recorded, has legal standing as a binding proposition, especially when the terms were specific, the consideration was named, and the other party, she met Maya's eyes, demonstrated clear awareness of the offer. The room felt slightly different than it had 30 seconds ago. You should be careful about what you offer in public, Patricia quoted quietly. Maya's own words, from the video, from the lobby. Kasi, you knew, Patricia said. It wasn't accusatory, more like recognition. In the moment, you knew. I knew something, Maya said. I didn't know what. Well, Patricia closed the portfolio with a soft, decisive sound. Now you have more information. She folded her hands on the table. Capable hands, steady hands, a different kind than Ruth's, but with the same quality of reliability. I'm not going to tell you this will be easy. It won't. Hale has a legal team that probably costs more per hour than your monthly rent. They will look at your life, your history, your finances, everything. They will try to make you the story instead of him. She held Maya's gaze. But you have something he didn't anticipate. What? Patricia nodded toward the phone in Maya's jacket pocket. 187,000 people watched that video this morning, and it's still climbing. Maya didn't say yes in the coffee shop. She said she needed to think, which was true, and Patricia Wren nodded as if she'd expected exactly that, left her card, and walked back out into the morning with the same precision she'd arrived with. Maya sat with her cold coffee for a long time after. She thought about the settlements, about Dion Marshall and the catering tray, and the 60 witnesses who'd apparently gone home and said nothing. She thought about the parking attendant who'd needed money quickly enough to take whatever was offered. She understood both of those decisions completely, understood them in her body, not just her mind. Urgency had a way of narrowing the world to whatever was immediately in front of you. The rent, the school fee, the $40. She took out her phone. The video had 240,000 views. She put the phone back in her pocket and called her mother. Ruth picked up on the second ring. She's good, Maya said. Patricia Wren, she's good. I know she is. You could have told me she was a lawyer. You would have decided before you met her. Ruth's voice was dry and entirely unapologetic. This way you got to form your own opinion. Maya almost smiled. I haven't decided anything yet. I know that too, Ruth said. But you're calling me, which means you're thinking about it. Which means you're further along than you think. After she hung up, Maya sat outside the coffee shop on a low concrete step and looked at the street in front of her. A bus went past. A man on a bicycle. 2 pigeons engaged in a territorial dispute over something near the curb. Ordinary Thursday morning. Ordinary city. Ordinary life. Except that somewhere across town, in an office that probably had a view and a name for itself, Richard Hale was going about his day, taking meetings, making decisions, laughing at whatever the next thing was that struck him as entertainment, and somewhere in a legal archive, Dion Marshall's sealed settlement sat in a folder that was never supposed to be opened again. Maya thought about Lily saying, when I talk and people listen. She thought about the way the lobby had gone quiet when she'd walked away. She opened her phone, found Patricia Wren's number, and typed a message. I'm in. Tell me what you need from me. She hit send before she could rethink it. Then she put the phone back in her pocket and stood up. 3 things happened that afternoon. The first, the video crossed 500,000 views, and 2 national news outlets picked up the story. Neither of them knew Maya's name yet. They referred to her as the hotel worker and to Richard Hale by his full title, CEO of Hale Capital Group, one of the largest private equity firms in the country. Net worth $4.3 billion. The contrast was apparently the story. Maya read both articles standing in the produce aisle of the grocery store, her basket in the crook of her arm, a slightly bruised apple in her hand. She put the apple back, bought the better ones. The second thing, Patricia Wren sent her a document to review, 31 pages. Maya sat at the kitchen table after dinner and read every word, which took an hour and a half and required 2 dictionaries, one paper, which had belonged to Ruth's mother, and one on her phone. She made notes in the margins in pencil, questions, mostly. A few things underlined. By the time she finished, the apartment was dark except for the kitchen light, and Ruth had gone to bed and Lily was making the small, complicated sounds she made in sleep, like someone narrating a dream just below the range of comprehension. Maya sat with the 31 pages in front of her and the pencil in her hand. She thought about what it meant to fight someone with $4 billion. She thought about what it cost, not in money, though that was real, but in attention, in exposure, in the specific vulnerability of having your life examined by people who were paid to find the worst version of it. She thought about Dion Marshall. She thought about the parking attendant whose name she didn't even know. She wrote one word in the margin of page 1, in capital letters, and circled it. Enough. The third thing happened at 11:52 at night, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Ms. Calloway." A man's voice. Smooth, professional, calibrated to convey reasonableness. "My name is Daniel Forsyth. I represent Richard Hale." A brief pause, the kind designed to feel like courtesy. "I was hoping we could have a conversation before this situation becomes something neither of you wants it to become." Maya was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "Does Mr. Hale know you're calling me at midnight?" A beat. "It's not quite midnight. It's 8 minutes to—" She kept her voice even. "I'll have my attorney contact yours in the morning. Have a good night, Mr. Forsyth." She hung up. Her hands were completely steady. She looked at them for a moment. Her hands, not her mother's, not Patricia's, just hers, and noticed that for the first time in longer than she could precisely remember, the tired feeling behind her eyes had been replaced by something else entirely. Not anger, cleaner than anger, clarity. The first thing Patricia told her the next morning was, "Don't read the comments." Maya had already read the comments. It was the kind of instruction that made complete sense and was also completely impossible to follow, because the comments were about her face, her voice, her life, the 7 seconds of her walking away from Richard Hale that had been watched, by Friday morning, by just under 1 million people. 1 million people had an opinion about those 7 seconds. Most of them were kind, some of them were not, and the unkind ones had a specific, surgical quality that the kind ones lacked. They found the soft places and pressed. She should have just done her job. Typical. Now she's going to try to sue him for money she didn't earn. If she was really that dignified, she wouldn't be working as a maid. That last one had 47 likes. Maya had counted. She closed the app and put her phone face down on the table, and sat with her coffee and tried to locate the version of herself that had felt clarity at midnight 3 days ago. It was still there. She could find it if she looked, but it was smaller in the daylight, surrounded by all the noise that daylight brought. Patricia arrived at 9. She sat down at Maya's kitchen table. Ruth had made coffee, real coffee, the good kind she kept for guests, and opened her portfolio and went straight to business, which was its own form of kindness. "Forsyth called me this morning," she said. "He called me Tuesday night." Patricia looked up. "At what time?" 11:52. Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly, but a sharpening. "They're feeling the pressure from the video. That call was designed to make you feel that a quiet resolution was your best option before things escalated." She wrote something in her notes. "What did you say?" "I told him to call you." Patricia's expression didn't change, but something in her posture settled slightly, the way a structure settles when it finds its footing. "Good. They're going to come with a number, probably soon." "How much?" "Not enough." She said it simply, without drama. "Whatever they offer first, it won't be enough. Not because of the money, though the money matters, but because their first offer will have conditions. Silence, primarily. A non-disclosure agreement broad enough to cover not just the incident, but your ability to ever discuss Richard Hale in any context, in any medium, for any reason, for the rest of your life." She looked at Maya steadily. "That's what they're actually buying, not your claim." "Your silence?" Maya thought about Dion Marshall's sealed folder. "And if I don't take it, then we file, and the filing becomes public record, and the story becomes significantly larger." Patricia picked up her coffee. "Which is also the risk. Once we file, you don't control the narrative anymore. The press does. And the press will want everything. Your employment history, your finances, your personal life. They'll want Lily. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I know," Patricia said. "I'm not saying it to discourage you. I'm saying it so you go in with your eyes open, because the alternative," she set her cup down, "is that you take whatever they offer, sign the NDA, and Richard Hale does this again to the next person. And that person probably doesn't have a video." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Ruth, who had been standing near the counter with her own coffee, apparently finding something to look at through the window, said nothing. But Maya felt her mother's presence in the room like a hand on her shoulder. "Tell me about the filing," Maya said. The days after that had a particular texture that Maya hadn't expected. She had imagined, when she'd imagined anything at all, which she'd tried not to do too much, that the decision to fight would feel galvanizing, clean. The way decisions looked in films, where the music swelled and the protagonist's face went from troubled to resolved, in the space of a meaningful look at the horizon. It wasn't like that. It was forms. It was phone calls that came at inconvenient times. It was Patricia's paralegals emailing her lists of documents she needed to locate, pay stubs, the termination notice from the hotel, any written communication from her shift manager, bank statements going back 14 months. It was going through folders she kept in a shoebox under her bed, papers she'd accumulated without fully knowing why, some instinct for documentation that had never had a specific purpose before now. It was sitting across from Patricia on a Tuesday afternoon and being asked to describe, in detail, every moment of the lobby incident, from the time she entered the space to the time she walked away, to describe it once, and then again with different specific questions. What did she see? What did she hear? What did she feel? What did other people do? Where were they standing? What was the light like? It was reliving it in that flat, procedural way, and finding that the flatness didn't diminish it. If anything, the repetition made it more present, the weight of the shoe in her hand, the quality of his laughter, and it was everything outside the work. Her phone had become a complicated object. The video was at 1.4 million views by end of the first week, and journalists had begun finding her. She didn't know how, but they always did, messaging her through social media, leaving notes at the building's front door. 2 of them had approached her on the street, both polite, both with the bright and slightly aggressive curiosity of people who had a story in their teeth and didn't want to let go. Patricia had told her not to speak to any of them. She didn't. But the silence had its own cost. She'd see a headline, "Who is the hotel worker who stood up to billionaire Richard Hale?" and feel the strange vertigo of being a character in a story that was happening without her. They described her as composed and defiant and fearless, and she wanted to send all of them a photograph of herself reading their articles at 1 a.m. with her 3rd cup of tea, her hair in a bun that had given up trying, her hands not quite steady. She wasn't fearless. She was afraid constantly, a low, ambient fear that lived just below the surface of everything she did, afraid of what would come out about her, afraid of what it would cost Lily, not money but attention, exposure, the particular cruelty that children were capable of when they had information about another child's parent, afraid of losing, afraid, in the complicated way of someone who had been managing on very little for a long time, of what winning might ask of her. She'd found another job, evenings, 4 days a week, at a catering company 3 subway stops away. It was through Ruth's network again, a woman named Clarice whose daughter Ruth had known since they were young. The pay was slightly less than the hotel, the hours were harder, but Clarice was a square, decent person who had watched the video and said only, when Maya came in for the first shift, "I just need you here and reliable. That's all I need," which was more dignity than most offers contained. She came home from the first catering shift at 11:30 on a Thursday and found Lily still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and a very serious expression. "You should be asleep," Maya said, dropping her bag. "I know." Lily didn't move. "Mom?" "What?" "At school today, Priya said her mum saw a video of you on the news." She looked at her mother carefully. "She said you were arguing with a rich man." Maya sat down across from her daughter. "I wasn't arguing. I was being spoken to in a way that wasn't kind, and I chose not to accept it." Lily considered this. What did he do?" "He dropped his shoe and asked me to clean it on the floor." "In front of people?" "Yes." "And you didn't?" "No." Lily was quiet for a moment, turning her glass of water in small rotations on the table. Was he embarrassed? I don't think he's someone who embarrasses easily. Were you scared? Maya looked at her daughter, 7 years old, dark eyes, Ruth's cheekbones, a quality of attention that had always felt older than its age, the kind of child who asked the questions that cut straight through to the center of things. Yes, Maya said. A little. Lily nodded slowly, as if this were the right answer, as if the fear made it more real and therefore more worth something. Priya's mom said you were brave, she said. Priya's mom is kind. I think you were brave too. Lily finished her water and stood up with the decisive energy of someone who had resolved something internally and was now ready to move on. But also I think you should have made him clean his own shoe. Maya laughed. A real one, sudden and genuine, the kind that came from somewhere unguarded. You're probably right, she said. What she hadn't told Patricia, hadn't told anyone, was the thing that happened Wednesday afternoon, 4 days into the process. She'd been at the library, not for anything related to the case, just for quiet. She'd started going there on her days off for years, ever since Lily was small, back when the apartment felt too close and the city felt too loud, and she needed a place where existing was enough. Librarians didn't ask why you were there. She was in the back section, near the periodicals, when she opened her laptop and found an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line was, "You don't know me, but I know what he did." She almost deleted it. She should have forwarded it straight to Patricia. She opened it. The email was 7 paragraphs long. It was from a woman named Cora Simmons, who said she had worked as an administrative assistant at Hale Capital Group 4 years ago, who said she had seen things, who said she had signed something. A very comprehensive document was how she put it, and that she'd been told, in language that was polite and precise and completely unambiguous, what would happen if she ever discussed her time at the company with anyone. But she'd seen the video. I just need someone to know, the email said near the end, that what happened to you isn't new, and that what he did in that lobby is the smallest version of what he's capable of. Maya read the email 3 times. Then she sat back in her library chair and looked at the water-stained ceiling tiles and thought about the word comprehensive. She thought about Dion Marshall, the parking attendant, now Cora Simmons. She thought about the specific geometry of a man who had done something enough times to develop a system for it. Her hands were in her lap. She looked at them, not her mother's hands, not Patricia's, just hers. The hands that had held the shoe, the hands that had set it down. She forwarded the email to Patricia. Then she sat in the quiet of the library for a long time, surrounded by the soft sounds of pages turning and keyboards clicking and the particular, irreplaceable smell of books that had been opened and closed by many different hands over many years. She was afraid. She was also something else. She was starting to understand that this was bigger than a shoe. Patricia called her at 7:14 the next morning, which meant she hadn't slept. Maya knew what that meant before she even answered. Patricia was a person who slept. She'd mentioned it once, in passing, as a professional discipline, the way athletes talked about recovery. I don't negotiate tired, she'd said. Tired lawyers make expensive mistakes. So 7:14 meant something had happened. Tell me about Cora Simmons, Patricia said, without greeting. I forwarded you everything she sent me. I know, I've read it 4 times. I need to know if you've responded to her. No, I waited for you. A brief pause, approval compressed into silence. Good. Don't respond yet. I need 24 hours. Another pause, longer this time. Maya, if what she's describing is what I think it is, this case just became something significantly different from what we filed. Maya was standing at her kitchen window, the early morning light coming in flat and pale. Below, the street was just beginning to move. A woman with a stroller, a man unlocking a shop gate, a cab idling at the corner. The ordinary architecture of a morning that felt, in this moment, not quite ordinary. Tell me, Maya said. Not yet. I need to verify first. Patricia's voice had the quality of someone choosing words from a very specific set and discarding the imprecise ones. Jazz, but I want you to think about something. When Hale's lawyer called you at Forsyth, he called at midnight. The video had been up for less than 48 hours at that point. That is an unusually fast response for a legal team dealing with what should have been, from their perspective, A manageable PR incident. Maya thought about that. They were already watching, or they were already worried. A pause. About something other than the video. The 24 hours stretched like something elastic. Maya worked her catering shift. She picked up Lily. She helped with spelling homework. This week's words included necessary and exaggerate, both of which Lily approached with grim determination. She sat with Ruth after Lily was asleep and didn't say much, and Ruth didn't ask much. And they watched an old film on the small television, something from the 80s with too much hair and not enough sense, and it was exactly what the evening needed. She tried not to think about Cora Simmons. She thought about Cora Simmons constantly. The email kept returning to her, particularly the phrase near the end. The smallest version of what he's capable of. She'd turned it over and over, the way you worked a splinter you couldn't quite reach, knowing it was there, feeling its edge, unable to extract it cleanly. What she'd experienced in that lobby was humiliation, public and deliberate. It had cost her a job, a month's stability, a specific quality of peace she hadn't fully recovered. That was real. That was enough. But Cora Simmons, who had worked inside Hale Capital Group, who had been made to sign a very comprehensive document, who had seen things, Cora Simmons was describing something with a different weight to it. The smallest version. She woke at 3 a.m. and lay in the dark and thought about the other women who might have signed comprehensive documents, about how many Dion marshals there were, how many parking attendants, how many lobby incidents that hadn't been caught on camera, hadn't had a woman standing slightly to one side with her phone at exactly the right angle, hadn't gone viral before anyone could contain them. She thought about systems, how they were built, how they were maintained, the infrastructure of a person who had never been stopped. She got up, made tea, sat with it at the kitchen table. The boss fish watched from above the radiator, enormous, purple adjacent, presiding. Tell me everything, she thought at it. The fish, characteristically, said nothing. Patricia called back in 19 hours, not 24. I need you to come in, she said. Bring your mother if you want. This is the kind of conversation that's better in person. The office was in a building that was neither impressive nor unimpressive, a deliberate middle register, the kind of place where serious work happened without needing to announce itself. The waiting room had good chairs and bad art, and a receptionist named Marco who offered water or coffee with equal sincerity. Maya took water. Ruth took coffee. They sat. Patricia came out herself to get them, which she hadn't done the first time. Small signal. Maya filed it. The inner office had a window that looked out over a narrow courtyard, a desk that was comprehensively covered in paper, and two chairs across from it that had clearly heard a great deal. Patricia sat on the desk side A, opened a folder, and looked at both of them for a moment. I'm going to tell you some things, she said. Some of what I'm about to say is verified. Some of it is credibly sourced but not yet confirmed. I'll tell you which is which as we go. Maya nodded. Cora Simmons worked at Hale Capital Group from 6 years ago to 4 years ago as an executive administrative assistant to the CFO. During her time there, she witnessed and in some cases was asked to facilitate a pattern of behavior by Richard Hale toward lower-level employees, service workers, and what the internal culture apparently referred to as, Patricia glanced at her notes, perimeter staff. She looked up. That phrase means anyone who wasn't a named employee of the firm, cleaning crews, building services, catering, drivers. Perimeter, Ruth said quietly. The word landed in the room with its full weight. The behavior Simmons describes includes repeated public humiliation, deliberate degradation in front of witnesses, and this is the part I'm still verifying, in at least 2 cases. Instances where Hale used the firm's legal resources to suppress complaints before they could be formalized. Patricia set her pen down. He didn't just settle after the fact. He had a process for identifying and neutralizing complaints before they became visible. Maya was very still. The NDA wasn't just for settlements. No. Patricia shook her head. Simmons says that anyone in a service role who interacted regularly with Hale, drivers, the building cleaning contractor, catering vendors, was required, as a condition of continued contract, to sign what was described as a standard liability waiver. She let that sit for a moment. It wasn't a liability waiver. What was it? A non-disparagement agreement so broad that it effectively prohibited any signatory from making any statement, in any form, to any party, about any experience with any employee of Hale Capital Group, past, present or future. Patricia picked up a page from the folder and set it in front of Maya. "This is a copy of the document Simmons signed. I had a colleague review it." Maya looked at it. The language was dense, measured, and, even to someone without legal training, deeply strange in its comprehensiveness. Clauses folded into other clauses. Definitions that expanded to cover almost any conceivable form of communication. "This is," Maya started. "Aggressive," Patricia said. "Very, and potentially unenforceable in its current form, which is possibly why they've relied on people not knowing that." She folded her hands. "People sign things, Maya, especially when they need the contract, the shift, the day's work. They sign things they haven't fully read and didn't understand, or understood and felt they had no choice about." A pause. That's what he was counting on. Ruth set her coffee cup down. She hadn't spoken since the word perimeter, but she'd been listening with the focused, gathering quality of someone building something internally. "How many people signed it?" she asked. "Simmons estimates dozens, across multiple vendor contracts, over at least 6 years." Patricia looked at Ruth, then at Maya. "And here's the part that is confirmed. 3 weeks before your incident at the Grand Vantage, 3 weeks, the hotel renewed its service contract with Hale Capital Group. Hale's team stayed there several times a year. The hotel had signed a preferential client agreement that included," she checked her notes, "discretionary conduct provisions." Silence. Maya heard it before she fully understood it. As the hotel knew, the hotel's management signed something that gave Hale's team latitude over staff conduct within the hotel's premises. It's buried in contract language about guest experience standards and service flexibility. Patricia's voice remained even, but there was something beneath it, a controlled anger, professional and precise. It's not clear that the hotel's frontline managers even knew it was in there. It's the kind of clause that gets agreed to at a corporate level and never filters down to the people it actually affects. "Like me," Maya said, "like you." The courtyard outside the window was very quiet. A pigeon landed on the ledge for a moment, looked in, decided against it, left. Maya thought about the termination notice, budget cuts, restructuring, the shift manager who couldn't meet her eyes. She'd thought it was guilt, the ordinary kind, the discomfort of a decent person doing an indecent thing. But it might have been something else. He might not have known either. He might have received a call, a directive, something framed as administrative, and done what people in the middle of structures always did, passed it down without asking what it meant. She thought about Cora Simmons, sitting somewhere with her comprehensive document, watching the video, counting the views, deciding, finally, to open a new email and type a subject line, "You don't know me, but I know what he did." "Can she testify?" Maya asked. "She's willing to talk. Whether she can testify depends on what her NDA actually prohibits, which is what my colleague is still analyzing, but..." Patricia picked up her pen again. "Willingness matters. It means she exists. It means there may be others who, seeing that she's willing, may also be willing." "And Forsyth," Maya said. "When he calls with their first offer, he already has." Patricia allowed a very small pause to exist around that sentence. "He called at 6 this morning, before I called you." She opened a different section of the folder. "They're offering a settlement, significant, well above what we initially estimated they'd open with, and an NDA." "How significant?" Patricia told her. Maya heard the number. She looked at the folder. She looked at her mother's face, Ruth, who was watching her daughter with an expression that contained everything and gave nothing away, that let the decision be entirely, completely Maya's. She looked back at Patricia. "And if I take it," she said slowly, Cora Simmons goes back to silence. The other drivers, the catering workers, the cleaning crews, the next person in a hotel lobby. "Yes. And if I don't, it gets harder and louder. And we don't control what it costs you." Patricia said it without softening. "I won't pretend otherwise." Maya sat with all of it. The number, which was real and large, and would mean February's rent, and Lily's school fees, and the cracked phone replaced, and the shoebox of documents, exchanged for a filing cabinet and maybe puck, a proper bed frame instead of the one currently held up on one side by a stack of hardbacks. She sat with the perimeter staff, with the comprehensive documents, with the pigeon that had looked in the window and found the room too full of consequence to stay. She sat with the version of herself who had set the shoe down on the floor of the Grand Vantage lobby, handle side up, like a question she'd already answered. "Tell Forsyth no," she said. Ruth reached across and put her hand over Maya's, just for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee. "All right," Patricia said. She wrote something in her notes. Whatever it was, she wrote it without hesitation. That evening, Maya received a second email from Cora Simmons. One line this time. "I heard you said no. I have a friend who also worked there. Her name is Diane. She's been waiting for someone to go first." Maya read it standing in the hallway outside the apartment, still in her coat. She could hear Lily inside, laughing at something. That full, abandoned laugh that children had before they learned to be self-conscious about joy. She typed back 3 words. "Give her Patricia." She went inside, took off her coat, hung it on the hook. For the first time in weeks, she slept straight through until morning. The filing went public on a Tuesday. Patricia had warned her. She'd explained, in her careful, precise way, exactly what would happen, the sequence, the timing, the specific mechanisms by which a legal document became a news story. She described it the way a surgeon might describe an incision, necessary, controlled, and still, despite everything, a cut. Maya had nodded and said she understood. She hadn't understood. Not fully. Not the way you can only understand something by living through it. By Wednesday morning, her name was everywhere. Not the hotel worker, not the composed woman from the video. Maya Calloway, 34 years old, single mother, formerly of the Grand Vantage Hotel, now plaintiff in a lawsuit against Richard Hale and Hale Capital Group, alleging wrongful termination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the part that made every headline, breach of verbal contract. The $1 million, in writing, in a legal filing, in black and white. The argument that the offer made in the lobby of the Grand Vantage, witnessed by multiple people and recorded on video watched by 2.3 million viewers, constituted a binding verbal proposition under state contract law. That was the part that caught fire. She stopped reading the news by Thursday. She stopped reading it because the coverage had split, cleanly, almost surgically, into 2 camps that were talking entirely past each other. One side had decided she was a symbol, a representative of something larger, a story about power and dignity, and the particular vulnerability of people in service work. The other side had decided she was opportunistic, litigious, a woman who had seen a chance and taken it, who was using a technicality to extract money from a careless comment. Neither side was talking about her. They were talking about whatever she'd become in their particular story. She found that out on Thursday when she picked Lily up from school, and 3 cameras were waiting outside the gate. She put herself between the cameras and her daughter without thinking. It was pure body, pure instinct, the same motion she'd made when Lily was 18 months old and had lurched toward a hot stove. She kept her hand on Lily's back and walked to the car Ruth had borrowed from the woman at church. And she didn't look at the cameras and she didn't say anything, and she didn't stop moving until the door was closed and they were pulling away. Lily was very quiet in the back seat. "Mom," she said, after 2 blocks. "I know, baby. Were those for you?" "Yes. Because of the man and the shoe. Because of all of it." Another block of quiet. "Then, did they scare you?" Maya looked in the rearview mirror at her daughter's face. "A little?" "Me too," Lily said. And then, with the particular pragmatism of children in difficult situations, "Can we get soup for dinner? The kind with the noodles?" "Yes," Maya said. "Absolutely yes." She called Patricia from the bathroom of the catering company that evening, between the main course going out and the dessert setup, standing with her back against the tile wall, voice low. "They found Lily's school," she said. "I know. I've been dealing with it." Patricia's voice was tight in a way Maya hadn't heard before, not panicked, but pressurized. "Hale's PR team has been feeding angles to specific outlets. The narrative they're building is that you're unstable, opportunistic, and being used by a brief pause, choosing words, legally aggressive attorney for publicity purposes. Are they wrong about the attorney part?" A half-beat. I am aggressive. That's accurate. Something that wasn't quite a laugh. The rest is noise. But Maya, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. She pressed the phone closer. Through the kitchen door, she could hear the organized chaos of service, the clatter, the voices, the systemic rush of 100 plates moving to 100 tables. Forsyth filed a counter-motion this afternoon, Patricia said. They're challenging the verbal contract claim on the grounds that no reasonable person could have interpreted Hale's statement as a genuine offer. They're calling it obvious hyperbole, a joke, a pause, and they've included in the filing something I didn't anticipate. They've subpoenaed your employment records, all of them, every job you've held in the last 7 years. The bathroom was very quiet despite the noise beyond the door. Why? Maya asked, though she already knew the shape of the answer. Because they're going to build a picture of someone who moves between jobs frequently, who has had friction with employers before, who has a pattern of... Patricia stopped. It's a standard tactic. Make the plaintiff's history the story instead of the defendant's behavior. I want you to be prepared. Maya thought about the jobs, the cafe, the cleaning company, the hotel, a brief, disastrous 6 weeks at a call center, the year Lily was 4 and wouldn't sleep, and Maya was running on approximately nothing. A retail position she'd left after a manager had started scheduling her off the books on certain shifts. All of it documented, all of it real, all of it susceptible to a certain kind of framing if you were paid to frame it. Is there anything in there that will hurt us? Patricia asked. Careful, direct, necessary? Guy left the retail job without notice, Maya said. The manager. There was a situation. I should have filed something formally. I didn't. I just left. She paused. And there's a gap of about 4 months, 6 years ago, when Lily was 1. I wasn't working. Why not? She hadn't said it out loud in a long time. Not the full version. I had postpartum depression. Severe. It took me a while to come back. She kept her voice flat and factual because it was the only way she could say it without it becoming something else. I didn't seek formal treatment. I couldn't afford it. My mother helped me. I came back. Silence on the line. Okay, Patricia said quietly. Just that. No performance of empathy. No careful professional softening. Just the word, landing like an acknowledgement. Thank you for telling me. I'd rather know everything than be surprised. Will they use it? They might try. We'll be ready if they do. A pause. How are you holding up? Maya looked at the bathroom wall. White tile, a small water stain near the ceiling, shaped vaguely like a running dog. The kind of detail you only noticed when you were standing still in a small room, trying to locate yourself. I'm holding up, she said, which was true in the technical sense. What she didn't say to Patricia, what she didn't say to anyone, was that the thing pulling at her now wasn't fear. It was something more complicated and less clean. It was doubt. Not about what had happened in the lobby, not about Richard Hale, whose behavior she understood with a clarity that hadn't dimmed, not even about the filing, or the decision to say no to the settlement, or the word she'd written in the margin of Patricia's document. The doubt was about herself. It came at night mostly. That particular hour between 2 and 4 when the rational mind was tired enough to let the other things in. She'd lie in the dark and a voice that sounded responsible, cautious, maternal, a voice that used her own intonation and knew exactly which arguments would land, would begin to make its case. You have a daughter. She was photographed outside her school. Her teacher probably has seen your name in the news. The children will talk. Children always talk. You had a job, you had stability, however thin. Now you have a catering shift and a lawsuit, and your mother is sleeping on your couch because she moved in to help with Lily, and she should be in her own home. The settlement they offered would have paid your rent for 3 years. It would have paid Lily's school through middle school. It would have put you somewhere safe enough to breathe. Who are you doing this for? She'd asked herself that question in the dark so many times that it had started to splinter. For Dion Marshall? Yes. For Cora Simmons, and Diane, and the parking attendant whose name she still didn't know. For the perimeter staff, which was a phrase she couldn't stop hearing in Ruth's voice, the specific register of quiet fury that her mother had used when she said it. But also, and this was the part the doubt pressed on, for herself, because she was angry. Because being angry and being right didn't always produce clean outcomes, And she knew that, and she was doing it anyway. And some nights she couldn't tell if that was courage or stubbornness or something she didn't have a comfortable name for. She got up one of those nights and went to the kitchen and found Ruth already there, sitting with a glass of water, doing nothing, just sitting. They looked at each other. "Can't sleep," Maya said. "Never needed much," Ruth said. She gestured at the chair across from her. Maya sat. They were quiet for a while. The city was its nighttime self outside the window, reduced, murmuring, the version of itself that only showed up when the performing was done. "Tell me something," Maya said. "Ask me something. Did you know, when you gave me Patricia's name, did you know it would get this big?" Ruth turned her water glass in her hands slowly, the way she did when she was thinking something through rather than choosing between thoughts she'd already had. "I knew it had the possibility to," she said. "I didn't know what you'd decide. That part was yours. What would you have decided?" Ruth looked at her daughter for a long moment, long enough that Maya felt it. "I spent 40 years cleaning other people's spaces," Ruth said. "Good work. Work I wasn't ashamed of. But 40 years of being perimeter." She used the word deliberately, precisely, and smiling when people looked through me, and making myself smaller so everyone else could feel bigger. She set the glass down. "I would have given anything, 30 years ago, for a camera, for a Patricia Wren, for a daughter asking me what I wanted." Maya looked at her mother's hands on the table. "So what you're really asking me," Ruth continued, "isn't whether I knew it would get big. You're asking if you should keep going." "I think so. And you already know the answer." "I think so," Maya said again, softer this time. Ruth picked up her water glass. "Then stop asking and go to sleep." She stood, rinsed the glass, set it in the rack. At the doorway to the hallway, she paused. "Lily told me yesterday she wants to be a lawyer when she grows up." Maya looked up. "She told me she wanted to be a marine biologist. She's diversifying." Ruth disappeared down the hall. Maya sat alone in the kitchen for a while after. The boss fish presided. The city murmured. Somewhere deep in the building, a pipe made the sound that pipes made in old buildings. A knock, a settle, the infrastructure of the place adjusting to the night. She went back to bed. She slept, but the crisis wasn't done. It was waiting for her on Friday morning in the form of a call from a number she recognized, not Forsyth, not a journalist, a number from the catering company. "Clarice." "I need to talk to you," Clarice said. Her voice had an unfamiliar quality, compressed. "Before your shift tonight." They met at the coffee shop near the catering company, different from the one where she'd met Patricia, smaller, with a broken chair by the window that had a piece of tape on it as a warning. Clarice was already there when Maya arrived. She had coffee in front of her that she wasn't drinking. She was a straightforward woman, Clarice, the kind of person whose face matched what she was thinking, which Maya had always found quietly extraordinary. She looked, right now, like someone who had been asked to do something she didn't want to do. "So someone called the company," Clarice said without preamble. "Yesterday said they were a journalist, asked questions about you, your reliability, whether you'd had any incidents, what kind of worker you were." She looked at her coffee. "Then they said, and this is the part I want you to hear from me directly, they said they had documentation suggesting that you'd had a formal complaint filed against you at a previous employer. For theft." The word dropped into the room. Maya felt it land somewhere very specific, not in her chest where fear usually lived, but lower, in the stomach, the part that knew when something was designed. "That's not true," she said. "I know it's not true." Clarice looked up. "I know who you are. I know how you work. I know what Ruth's daughter looks like." She paused. "But I have a business. I have other employees. I have contracts with clients who did not sign up for—" She gestured vaguely at the shape of everything surrounding them. "Any of this." The broken chair by the window had lost a little more tape since the last time Maya had been here. It flapped softly in the draft from the door. "Are you letting me go?" Maya asked. Clarice didn't answer immediately. She turned her coffee cup in a slow rotation, the same motion Ruth made with her water glass when she was thinking, and the recognition of it was almost unbearable. "I'm telling you," Clarice said slowly, "that someone is trying to make it so you have nowhere to stand. No job, no income, no ground." She looked at Maya directly. "I'm telling you, because I want you to know what's happening, and because—" She stopped, pressed her lips together briefly, Because you should know that I'm not going to let them use me to do it." Maya was very still. "You're not fired," Clarice said. "I want you to be clear on that. You come in tonight and you work your shift and we don't discuss this again." She picked up her coffee, finally, and drank. "But you should call your lawyer. Today. Before tonight." Maya called Patricia from the sidewalk outside, not waiting to be further away, not waiting for a better moment. The story about the theft allegation came out in 30 seconds flat, no inflection, just the facts in the order they'd happened. Patricia was quiet through all of it. When Maya finished, there was a pause of maybe 4 seconds, the kind of pause that processed. "That's not a journalist," Patricia said. "That's opposition research. Hale's team is trying to manufacture a record." Her voice had shifted into something harder than Maya had heard before, not angrier, but denser, more concentrated. "This is what it looks like when someone is actually scared." "Hale is scared," Maya said. It wasn't quite a question. His lawyers are scared, which means he told them about something. Something in that building that they do not want surfaced. A pause. "We need Diane. We need her yesterday. I'll call Cora Simmons." "Call her now." Then, just before she hung up, "Maya, they're escalating because we're close to something. I need you to hold." She stood on the sidewalk. The city moved around her, indifferent, continuous, exactly as it always was. She thought about what it meant that Richard Hale, worth $4.3 billion, was apparently concerned enough about a 34-year-old woman with a cracked phone and a catering job to send someone to call Clarice. She thought about what was in that building. She thought about Cora Simmons' phrase, the smallest version of what he's capable of, and wondered, for the first time, what the largest version looked like. She called Cora Simmons. It rang 4 times. 5. Then, "I've been waiting for you to call." Cora Simmons was not what Maya had imagined. She'd built a picture from the emails, careful, frightened, someone leaning out of a window to call for help without being seen doing it. What she found, sitting across from her in Patricia's office on a grey Saturday morning, was a woman in her late 30s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the specific, composed exhaustion of someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had finally, deliberately set it down. She had a folder with her. She'd brought it herself, without being asked. Inside were documents she'd kept, copies of things she technically shouldn't have copied. She acknowledged that without apology, kept them because some part of her had always known there would be a morning like this one. Diane Chen was there too. Smaller, quieter, a former payroll assistant at the firm, who had worked there for 3 years and had signed the same comprehensive non-disparagement agreement everyone else had. She sat very straight in her chair and held her coffee cup with both hands and said very little. But what she said precisely and without flinching. Patricia sat across from both of them. Maya sat beside her. Ruth was not there. She was with Lily, but her absence felt like a presence. "The way some people managed. Start from the beginning," Patricia said to Cora. "Not from what you told Maya, from the actual beginning." Cora opened her folder. What came out over the next 2 hours was not a single revelation, but a series of them. Each one connected to the last, each one making the shape of what Richard Hale had done more visible, the way lights coming on in a dark building revealed not just the rooms, but their arrangement. It started with the vendor contracts. Cora had processed some of them, standard administrative work, routing documents for signature, filing confirmations. She hadn't read them carefully at first. Nobody did. They were long and dense and written in the language of people paid to obscure. But one afternoon, 3 years into her employment, she'd needed to locate a specific clause for a vendor dispute and had read the hotel services contract, not the Grand Vantage, a different one, a property Hale's team used in another city, and had found the conduct provision. She'd read it twice. Then she'd gone to her supervisor and said she thought there might be an error, that surely this clause wasn't standard, that it seemed to give Hale's team unusual latitude over how hotel staff could be treated. Her supervisor had looked at the clause, looked at her, and said, "That's not an error. Flag anything that needs legal review and move on." She'd moved on, but she'd kept a copy. Over the following months, she'd found the same clause, in slightly varied language, in 4 other service contracts, a cleaning company, a catering vendor that served multiple Hale Capital events annually, a private car service. Each contract contained language that, buried in the administrative architecture, effectively indemnified Hale's team from any conduct complaint arising from interactions with the contracted company's employees. They weren't just protecting him after incidents, Patricia said, leaning forward slightly. They were structuring the contracts to prevent incidents from being reportable. Yes, Cora said, the employees of those contractors couldn't complain to their own companies without triggering a breach of contract claim. The companies were incentivized to handle any, she chose the word carefully, friction internally, without involving outside parties. Without involving law enforcement, Patricia said. Yes. The room was very quiet. Maya thought about the hotel shift manager, who couldn't meet her eyes, the company that had fired her within 3 hours. She thought about whether he'd known what was in the contract, or whether he'd simply received a call and done what the structure required him to do. She thought about how elegant it was, how thorough, not a cover-up, which implied messiness, aftermath, things to be hidden, a prevention, a system designed so that there was nothing to cover up because there was no official record of anything happening. Diane, Patricia said, turning to the quieter woman. You worked in payroll. Diane nodded. For the last year I was there. I was processing certain payments that weren't categorized the way I expected. She set her coffee down. Payments to individuals, not companies, individuals, through a discretionary account that reported to Hale directly. Not through HR, not through finance in any normal sense, directly to him, released by him. Amounts. Variable. Some small, some not. Diane's voice was even, factual. The voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her head many times and had decided the only way through it was straight. There were notations on the payment records. Not names, reference numbers that corresponded to, I eventually realized, to the incident log that Forsyth's office maintained. Patricia's pen stopped moving. There was an incident log, Maya said. Yes. Diane looked at her directly for the first time. Not formal, not discoverable in any obvious way, but yes. A record of interactions, and that's what it was called internally, interactions between Hale and service workers and the corresponding payments made to resolve them. She paused. I have the reference numbers. I don't have the log itself, but the reference numbers exist. Patricia sat back in her chair. It was the first time Maya had seen her do that. Lean back, away from the work, as if she needed a moment of physical distance from what she'd just heard. She looked at the ceiling briefly, some internal calculation happening at speed, then came back. That log, she said carefully, if it exists and can be located, is the entire case. It's not just your wrongful termination and the verbal contract. It's a documented pattern of deliberate harm maintained over years. She looked at Cora, then Diane. House, can either of you locate it? I know who can, Cora said. The name she gave was Martin Reyes, a former IT consultant who had worked on contract for Hale Capital Group, who had been responsible for maintaining the firm's internal document management system, who had also signed the non-disparagement agreement. Everyone signed it, no apparently, it was as standard as a parking validation, but who had, in the way of IT people everywhere, known exactly where everything was stored and exactly how to find it. He wasn't in the city. He was 3 states away, running a small tech repair shop in a town that Patricia found on a map and described, without inflection, as remote. Will he talk to us? Patricia asked. I've already talked to him, Cora said, when the video went up. Before I emailed Maya. She looked at her folder. He's been waiting for someone to go first, too. Maya looked at the window, the narrow courtyard, the grey sky above it, a single branch visible at the edge of the frame, bare and precise against the cloud. She thought about all the people who had been waiting for someone to go first, waiting for a camera to be at the right angle, waiting for a woman to pick up a shoe and put it down again. Call him, Patricia said to Cora. Today. Martin Reyes drove in. He arrived Monday morning in a pickup truck that had lived a full life, with a paper coffee cup in the holder and the quiet manner of someone accustomed to solving problems that other people had made unnecessarily complicated. He was in his mid-40s, unremarkable in every deliberate way, and he shook Maya's hand when they were introduced with a directness that she appreciated. He sat in Patricia's office, and he told them where the log was, not metaphorically, specifically. A server location, a file path, a backup system that Hale's legal team had apparently not known to look at because it was part of an older architecture that Martin had maintained and that nobody else fully understood. It had not been deleted. Deleting it would have required knowing it existed, and knowing it existed would have required understanding a system that only one person had ever really understood. "Can it be accessed legally?" Patricia asked. "It's on a server that the firm owns, but—" Martin paused. The specific pause of someone who understood a technicality precisely. The backup system was contracted through a third-party provider. The provider has its own data retention obligations. Under certain discovery conditions, that provider can be compelled to produce what they hold. He looked at Patricia. "If you know what to ask for—" "I know what to ask for," Patricia said. The motion to compel discovery was filed on Wednesday. Forsyth's response came in 18 hours, faster than anything else in the case, faster even than the midnight call. It was dense and aggressive and argued against the discovery request on 7 distinct grounds, which Patricia read through once, annotated in red, and described to Maya as desperate. 7 grounds, she said. If they were confident there was nothing there, they'd have argued 1. 2, to maybe. She tapped the filing. 7 means they know exactly what's on that server, and they do not want us to have it. The judge, a woman in her 60s who Patricia described as having no patience for procedural theater, heard the arguments on Friday. Maya sat in the gallery. She'd insisted on being there, and Patricia had agreed on the condition that she sit still and say nothing, and let her face be neutral, regardless of what happened. She sat still. She said nothing. She was not entirely neutral. Hale's team argued that the discovery request was a fishing expedition, speculative, overbroad, designed for harassment rather than legitimate legal purpose. Forsyth himself argued, his voice carrying the practiced conviction of someone who had made this particular speech many times before, that the plaintiff's case rested on a fringe interpretation of verbal contract law, and that expanding discovery to include internal firm records was disproportionate to the claim. Patricia argued for 11 minutes. She was precise, unhurried, and used exactly the words she needed and none of the ones she didn't. She named the reference numbers Diane had provided. She named Martin Reyes, his role, his knowledge of the system. She described the pattern, the vendor contracts, the conduct provisions, the individual payments, and she argued that the requested discovery was not speculative at all, but targeted, specific, and directly material to demonstrating that the incident at the Grand Vantage was not an aberration, but the visible surface of a deliberate system. The judge asked 3 questions. Patricia answered them without pause. The ruling came 4 days later. Discovery granted. Maya was in the catering kitchen when Patricia called. She stepped out into the alley behind the building, the cold coming off the concrete walls, the sounds of the kitchen muffled behind the door. "We have access to the server," Patricia said. "My forensic team starts tomorrow." Maya leaned against the wall. Above the alley, a strip of night sky, very dark. 1 star visible, or possibly a plane. "How long?" she asked. "To go through it properly. Weeks. But we don't need to go through all of it. We need the log. Martin says he knows the file path. Once we confirm it exists and document its contents—" Patricia paused. "Everything changes. What does Forsyth do then?" "He calls us," Patricia said simply. "And this time he comes with a different kind of offer. He called on a Thursday 9 days into the forensic review, not at midnight this time. At 2 in the afternoon, which felt like its own kind of signal. The working hours of someone who had accepted that this was now a different conversation. Patricia took the call. Maya sat across from her in the office and listened to one side of it, which was enough. Patricia's side was mostly silence, punctuated by short, precise sentences. "We've seen enough of it to proceed. That's not a number we'd consider. No, we'll need more than that. I understand your position, Mr. Forsyth. Let me tell you ours." She spoke for approximately 3 minutes without stopping. Maya watched her face, controlled, focused, the face of someone who had been preparing this specific moment for months. She named the log. She named the number of entries it contained. She named the reference numbers Diane had identified. She named, briefly and precisely, what the pattern they described would look like to a jury. Then she said, "We're also not alone in this room, Mr. Forsyth. I want you to understand that before you respond, silence on the line. We have 3 additional witnesses prepared to file supporting declarations. One of them worked inside the firm for 3 years. One of them built the system that stored the log, and one of them," she paused, a fraction of a second precisely placed, "has already spoken to the State Attorney General's office." Maya hadn't known that last part. She kept her face neutral with everything she had. A long silence from Forsyth's end. Then his voice changed in a specific way that Patricia had predicted in the abstract, but that was something else to hear in reality. Compressed, recalculated, the voice of a man who had arrived expecting one conversation and found another entirely. He said, "I'll need to speak with my client." Patricia said, "You have 48 hours. She ended the call. She looked at Maya. "The Attorney General," Maya said. "Cora's doing. She made contact independently. 2 weeks ago. I found out Monday." Patricia's expression was composed, but beneath it something that might have been satisfaction, the deep, quiet kind. "She's been busy. You should have told me. You would have worried about it. I'm worrying about it now. Now it's useful to worry about it." Patricia set her phone down. "Because it means this isn't just a civil lawsuit anymore. It means there's a potential regulatory dimension, which means Hale isn't just looking at paying you. He's looking at what comes next if he doesn't." The courtyard was bright today. Unusual, the sun at an angle that actually reached the concrete. The branch Maya had watched for weeks had small buds on it now, barely visible, the first suggestion of a different season. "What do you think he does?" Maya asked. "I think," Patricia said, "that Richard Hale is about to discover what it costs when the system he built for everyone else gets used on him." The call came in 31 hours. Not Forsyth, Hale directly. Patricia had not expected that. She told Maya afterward that in 20 years of practice she had rarely had an opposing party call her personally, and that when they did, it meant one of 2 things. Either they were about to make a catastrophic error, or they were genuinely, finally, afraid. She'd recorded the call legally with disclosure. She played it for Maya in the office on Friday afternoon, Hale's voice on a small speaker, recognizable immediately, the same timbre she'd heard in the lobby, the same quality of a person accustomed to rooms organizing themselves around him, but different now in a way she hadn't anticipated. Not humble, exactly, not broken, but stripped of the particular ease that power provided when it was certain of itself. He talked for a while about resolution, about mutual benefit, about the importance of both parties being able to move forward. Professional language, careful, clearly partly prepared. Then Patricia had asked him one question, not about the case, not about the money, not about the log. She'd asked him, "Mr. Hale, what would you like Maya Calloway to understand about why you behaved the way you did in that lobby?" Silence, longer than anything else in the call. Then, "I don't expect her to understand anything. I expect her to accept that I'm prepared to make this right." "Make what right?" Patricia's voice on the recording, clean and direct. Another silence. "All of it," he said. Just that. 2 words, flat and stripped and containing, in their compression, more than anything else he'd said. Maya sat and listened to the recording end, and then sat in the quiet that followed. She thought about all of it. The lobby, the shoe-e, the laugh. Dion Marshall and the parking attendant and Cora sitting somewhere 4 years ago, making a copy of something she shouldn't copy because some part of her already knew. Martin in his pickup truck, driving 3 states because someone had finally gone first. Diane with her reference numbers and her straight back and her coffee held in both hands. She thought about Lily wanting to be a lawyer or a marine biologist, diversifying. She thought about what all of it sounded like when a man worth $4.3 billion said it in a quiet, flattened voice with the recording running. "What do we ask for?" she said. Patricia had a document ready. Of course she did. The negotiation took 11 days. Maya had expected it to feel like a battle, loud, grinding, the kind of process that left marks. Instead, it was quiet, in a way she hadn't anticipated. Documents moving between offices. Patricia on the phone in voices that didn't carry through the closed door. Numbers that changed in increments. Each change a small concession with its own specific meaning. She went to her catering shifts. She picked up Lily. She helped Ruth with her knee exercises on the mornings it was bad. She slept mostly, though not always straight through. She tried to live normally inside the machinery of something that was not normal at all. On the fourth day, Forsyth sent a draft agreement. Patricia read it in 2 hours and sent back 17 pages of revisions. On the sixth day, there was a counter. On the eighth day, Patricia came to the apartment instead of the office. She'd never done that before, and sat at the kitchen table where Ruth made coffee and Lily was at school, and they went through the revised terms together. Maya read every page this time without a dictionary. She'd learned enough in the past months to read it herself. The final agreement was not what anyone had originally imagined. Not even Patricia, who admitted this with the particular honesty of someone who respected precision enough to acknowledge when reality had exceeded projection. The monetary settlement was significant, enough that Maya read the number 3 times to make sure she was reading it correctly, and then looked at Patricia, who nodded once, and then looked at the wall for a moment because she needed somewhere neutral to put her eyes. But the money was not the part that mattered most. The part that mattered most was what wasn't in the agreement. There was no non-disclosure agreement. Patricia had made it a condition from the beginning, but Maya had understood it abstractly, as a legal position. Seeing it absent from the final document, seeing the space where the silence clause would have been and finding nothing there, was a different experience. Almost vertiginous. She'd become so accustomed to the architecture of secrecy, the way it structured everything around Hale, that its absence felt structurally strange. Like a wall removed from a room she'd learned to navigate in the dark. She could speak. She could tell it. She could say his name. In exchange, Richard Hale had agreed to 3 things beyond the financial settlement. First, a formal written acknowledgement, not an apology. Patricia had been precise about the language, an acknowledgement of the conduct pattern documented in the log. Second, the dissolution of the non-disparagement agreements with all vendor-contracted employees, effective immediately, with individual notifications sent to every signatory. Third, the establishment of an independent oversight body within Hale Capital Group, funded by the firm, staffed externally, with a mandate to receive and investigate conduct complaints from service workers across all contracted vendors. That last one had taken 3 days of the 11 to get through. Forsyth had argued against it in language that became progressively less composed as the days went on. Patricia had held it as a non-negotiable. "It's the only part that matters past you," she'd told Maya on day 7. "The money helps you. The acknowledgement is the truth. But the oversight body is the only thing that makes it harder to happen again." Maya had held it too. It stayed in. She signed on a Tuesday morning, which felt apt. Tuesdays were the day the filing had gone public. Tuesdays were apparently her day for things that changed the shape of what came after. Patricia had offered to arrange for a proper signing, a conference room, a formal setting. Maya had asked if she could sign at the kitchen table instead. Patricia had said yes without making it a thing, which was one of the reasons Maya had trusted her from the beginning. Ruth was there. Lily was at school. The boss fish presided from above the radiator. Maya read the final page one more time. She picked up the pen. Not the pencil she'd used to write enough in the margin months ago. A proper pen, blue ink, the kind of pen you used for things you meant. She signed. Patricia witnessed it, countersigned where she needed to, closed the folder with the same soft, decisive sound she'd made in the coffee shop the first morning, a sound Maya had come to understand as the sound of a door closing on something that was finished. "That's done," Patricia said. "That's done," Maya said. Ruth, who had been standing by the window, turned around. Her face was doing something complicated and quiet. She came to the table and put her hand on Maya's shoulder, the same gesture as that day in the office. Brief, complete. And then she picked up the coffee cups and took them to the sink. The days that followed were strange in a way Maya hadn't predicted. She'd prepared herself for relief. She'd been carrying the weight of it for long enough that she'd built a detailed picture of what setting it down would feel like, the specific lightness of it, the change in her shoulders, in her breathing, in the behind-the-eyes tired that had been her companion for months. The relief came, but it was quieter than she'd imagined, more gradual, less a single moment and more a slow returning. The way warmth came back to a hand after it had been cold, not all at once but in small increments, feeling by feeling. The first morning she woke up without the 3 a.m. pull toward the kitchen. She lay in the dark and noticed its absence, and felt something that was almost tenderness toward herself, toward the version of her that had gotten up all those times, made tea, sat with doubt like an unwanted guest who had stayed too long. That version had held. She called Cora Simmons the week after. Not for any procedural reason. The case was closed, the documents signed. Everything that needed to be communicated had been communicated through proper channels. She called simply because Cora had stood in an open doorway 4 years after signing a document designed to keep her in the dark, and had seen a video and had opened a new email. Cora picked up immediately, as if she'd been expecting the call, which she probably had. "I want you to know," Maya said, "that the oversight body is real. It's funded. It starts operating next quarter." A silence. The particular quality of silence that was someone receiving something they'd needed for a long time. "Good," Cora said. "Just that." And then, after a moment, "How are you?" "Better," Maya said. "Getting there." "Me too," Cora said. Getting there. She found out the parking attendant's name. She hadn't planned to look. She hadn't even consciously decided to. But one afternoon, sorting through the documents Patricia had returned to her, the original folder, the 31 pages, everything that had accumulated over months, she came across the name in a footnote of one of Patricia's early research documents. A reference, brief and factual, to the second incident in Hale's documented pattern, James Okafor, 41 years old at the time, had worked the parking structure adjacent to a building where Hale Capital Group held an annual client event. She sat with his name for a while. She didn't try to contact him. She didn't know if he'd want that, didn't know what shape his experience had taken, what the settlement had cost him in the ways that settlements always cost something regardless of the number, but she'd wanted to know his name. It had bothered her. That absence. This person reduced to the parking attendant in her own internal accounting of events, as if the anonymity of it were acceptable, as if it were the natural state of people on the perimeter. James Okafor. She said it once, out loud, in the empty kitchen. Then she put the documents in the filing cabinet she'd bought, not a shoebox, an actual cabinet, second-hand but solid, dove grey, with a working lock, and closed the drawer. She got a new job in the spring, not at a hotel, a non-profit that worked with service industry workers on employment rights, education, documentation, the specific knowledge that people needed to understand what they'd signed, what protections existed, what could be done when things went wrong. The work was different from anything she'd done before. It required her to talk, which she'd never been naturally inclined toward, to walk into rooms and explain things clearly and answer questions from people who were tired and pressed and needed the information to mean something practical, not theoretical. She was, it turned out, good at it. Her supervisor, a compact, fast-moving woman named Greta, who had been doing this work for 15 years, told her in the third week that she had a particular quality in those conversations. "You don't talk at people," Greta said. "You talk with them, like you know the room they're sitting in." She knew the room, she'd sat in it. The pay was less than the hotel, meaningfully less, which was a reality she navigated carefully and without self-pity. The settlement gave her breathing room, not permanence, and she was aware every day of the difference between a buffer and a foundation. She built carefully. She spent deliberately. She kept the filing cabinet locked. She kept the catering shifts too, 2 nights a week, partly for the income, partly because Clarice had stood on a sidewalk and refused to be used, and that deserved loyalty of a durable kind, partly because there was something grounding about the physical work, the plates, the sequence, the controlled choreography of a room being fed, that the new job didn't provide. She needed both. She was learning to be someone who needed both. Lily's spring play was on a Friday night in April. She was the narrator, Ms. Patterson had been right about the voice. It was clear, it carried. It had a quality of assurance that filled the school auditorium in a way that made parents in the back rows lean slightly forward without realizing they were doing it. She stood at the side of the small stage in a white shirt and her yellow raincoat, an insistence that Mr. Patterson had apparently decided not to fight, and she told the story of the play in the careful, Deliberate way of someone who understood that her job was to make sure everyone in the room knew what was happening. Maya sat in the third row with Ruth on one side and Patricia on the other. She hadn't planned on inviting Patricia. It had happened naturally, the way some things did when the boundaries between the professional and the personal had been erased not by accident, but by necessity. Patricia had accepted without making it ceremonious, which was exactly right. She watched her daughter stand at the edge of the stage and open her mouth and speak. When I talk, people listen. She had said it about a play, about Ms. Patterson's assessment of her classroom voice. But sitting in the third row in the school auditorium in April, Maya heard it differently, heard it land in a different part of herself, somewhere that had been listening for a long time without knowing what it was waiting to hear. She thought about the lobby, the shoe in her hand, the weight of it, the decision made in a fraction of a second that had not felt like a decision at all, but like the only possible thing. She thought about all the mornings at the kitchen table with the doubt that used the right voice, that knew exactly where to press. She thought about the pen and the word enough and the filing cabinet, and James Okafor and Cora opening a new email, and Diane with her reference numbers, and Martin driving 3 states in a truck that had lived a full life. She thought about perimeter. She was not perimeter. She had never been perimeter, that had been imposed. A category applied from the outside by people who needed it to be true in order to behave the way they behaved. It had never been accurate. It had just been loud and persistent, and backed by $4 billion and a system of documents and a legal team and a culture that made the geometry of it feel inevitable. It wasn't inevitable. She had known that in the lobby, some part of her, some steady, undisturbed, deep part. She had picked up the shoe and she had put it down and she had walked away, and she had said one sentence that contained everything she needed to say. You should be careful about what you offer in public. Not a threat, not a declaration, just a sentence that meant, I am here. I know what is happening. I am not what you think I am. And here, now, in the third row of a school auditorium in April, with her mother on one side and her attorney on the other, and her daughter standing at the edge of a stage in a yellow raincoat, telling everyone what was happening so that nobody in the room would be lost. She thought, yes. Just that yes. After the play in the hallway outside the auditorium, Lily found her immediately in the crowd, the way she always did, some internal compass that pointed directly at her mother regardless of the room. She was still in the yellow raincoat. She had a small bouquet of flowers someone had given her, yellow, which she had presumably requested. She looked up at Maya with the unself-conscious directness of someone who had just done something in public and knew she'd done it well. Did you hear me? She asked. Every word, Maya said. Lily considered this, satisfied. Then, Ms. Patterson said next year they're doing a bigger play. She said I could audition for a real part, with lines and everything. She paused. But I think I want to narrate again. Why? Because the narrator knows the whole story, Lily said, in the tone of someone explaining something obvious. Everyone else only knows their part. Maya looked at her daughter. The hallway was full of people, parents, children, teachers, all the ordinary noise of an ordinary Friday in April in a school that smelled like chalk and floor cleaner and something indefinable that all schools smelled like. Some compound of days accumulated. That's a good reason, Maya said. She took Lily's hand. She found Ruth in the crowd, her mother's face, the hands, the particular unhurried quality of her presence. She found Patricia just behind her, already in her coat, and their eyes met for a moment that didn't need words, that had enough in it already. She walked out of the school into the April night. The air was cold still, but with something underneath it, the particular cold that existed just before warmth became permanent. That meant the season had already decided, that what was coming was already on its way. She tilted her head back slightly, just for a second, above the school, above the streetlights, above the city doing what it always did, above all of it. The sky was the particular shade of dark blue that April evenings saved for themselves. The color of something that had no reason to explain itself. That simply was what it was. She lowered her eyes. She walked home.